So I want to tell you a little bit about my bias on this session. And it comes, we were just talking about sort of the religious background, right? It's not my religious parable, but I know it resonates for many people. This is a little bit like the Jesus parable in terms of you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach a man how to fish, you feed him for his lifetime, right? This is my bias, but before we jump into the techniques of particular financial literacy, I think we have to have a conversation about the culture. How do we create a safe culture to have conversations about class? And so the work that I've done and the research I've looked up and prepared for you today is really about having a conversation about creating a space where it's okay to talk about class. And as a college, we've done a great job, I think, on the financial literacy side. We may not have done as well, on the preparatory side. So we're going to spend, oh, great, okay, no problem. NASA's arrived. So we're going to spend a little time talking today about creating a space culturally that allows for a conversation around class. And I'm going to make the argument that when we talk about identity, class needs to be an aspect of that identity. So with that, there's a lot of research we're going to look at today. You have copies of the PowerPoints. I gave you them when you came in. The last couple of slides are all links to the online versions of these research studies. You're welcome to take a look at them. I also have kept copies on my own personal database so that if and when you look at these, and if they're not available any longer, they've moved or whatever, let me know, and I can send you a copy of the relevant research if you're interested. I would also tell you there's one piece that you won't be able to find on the web. I've printed it out for you because it was, I'll tell you about it a little later, but as a gift to you at the end of the night, I'll be giving you that in exchange for your evaluation. So your job is to do your evaluation for the session, and then you will get that last piece. But let's start here. So what do we know about why diversity? Why does diversity even matter in the higher education space? Well, there's very limited research. So if you're looking for a doctoral thesis question, this is a great one. What is the impact of a diverse college environment for student outcomes? But the limited research that there is does show consistently that racial and ethnic diversity has both a direct and indirect positive outcome on student experience and outcomes. Right? And so what we know, this comes from a piece called Does Diversity Make a Difference? And the answer is it does. Right? That by attending to multicultural learning, we extend the mission of the college or the academy. How many of you have been following the Harvard admissions case that's been going on right now? Right? You know, for those of you who know, have been following it, it's about a group of Asian American students who are suing Harvard, claiming that Harvard has turned them down, even though they should qualify because they're Asian American. Harvard's response is a really interesting one. It actually goes to this question, right? Harvard's response, if you read what they're saying, is that diverse makeup of a class is a social good. And that by saying some Asian Americans might be turned down who are more qualified than students of other racial or ethnic minorities or other racial or ethnic backgrounds, they're doing so to create diversity. And the diversity is a good for the students enrolling, and it's a good for society. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with that case. The history of this case is it's the same gentleman, by the way, who also brought the U Texas cases and the other cases where it's been a Caucasian student who's been suing. In this case, he's representing an Asian American. We'll see what comes out of this. And the question is, ultimately, it'll probably go to the Supreme Court. But what we do know about diversity is that it does have a positive impact on students. Of all races, by the way. Not just diverse students, but students of all races. Okay, well, what about socioeconomic diversity? What's the research show us about that? Well, what's interesting is that if you have a socioeconomically diverse institution, that institution is more likely to have cross-racial communication. The more diverse your institution, the more cross-racial communication there is, the more curricular diversity there is, and socioeconomic diversity enhances the campus racial climate. So again, these are research findings that come out of the research, and I would highly recommend you take a look if you're interested. The recommendation is that if you want to enhance the educational benefits of diversity, that as a college you can't just pay attention to racial or ethnic diversity, you have to also pay attention to socioeconomic diversity. right? And that intersection of race and class is a really, really poignant place. How many of you are familiar with the Peace and Justice Institute on campus? I've done work with PJI. I'm actually a PJI practitioner. I just did the practitioner program this last year. It was amazing. And actually on Monday, we did a sample of a workshop that they're going to be bringing, I think, to the Peace and Justice Forum this coming fall. And it was a workshop on understanding the racial wealth gap in America and what are the antecedents about the racial wealth gap in America. It was a very powerful piece. The simulation was powerful, but more powerful was the conversation, right? That's the kind of conversation about that intersection of race and class that is critical to extending the meaning of diversity and socioeconomic diversity. Okay, so what's the national context? And again, you may have heard this, you may know this, but this is what we're feeling or dealing with nationwide. More than half of the community college students in the country have experienced food insecurity while being a student. What does food insecurity mean?
Lack of food.
Yes, what else does it mean? They're not sure if they're going to get the next meal. They may not have the resource to purchase the next meal. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. Yeah, more than half nationwide. I'll give you the Valencia statistics in a moment, but that's troubling. All right, number two, 13% of students nationwide, community college students, have experienced homelessness while a student. And so there is some good news. This is both good news and bad news, right? We think of college as the great equalizer. That's the story we've been told throughout time, is that if you want to raise yourself up by your bootstraps, go to college, get a degree, and that will equalize opportunity for you. The story is a little more complicated than that. Right, for students who come from low SES backgrounds, lower socioeconomic status backgrounds, going to college is beneficial. It raises their economic outlook as compared to their peers who don't go to college. That is absolutely true. But what we also know is that students who go to college who are low SES and finish get less of a bump than the students who go to college who are from high SES backgrounds and finish. Right? This is the rich get richer and the poor get poor. Now, I want to nuance this message, right? College is still a net benefit for students from low SES backgrounds. They just don't get as much of an advantage as their high SES peers do. That's troubling to me, right? It should be troubling to all of us because it says there's a problem with our system generationally, right? Again, some of you are looking at me like, yeah, I know this, what's news, right? I mean, but again, important to understand that is the situation we deal with. And it says it here, right? For low SES students, attending college doesn't necessarily translate into a rise economically or socially at a level similar to their high SES peers. So what about Valencia's context? So I've taken these data from a couple of different places, Valencia Facts, Trends in Student Aid, but important to understand, of our enrolled credit-seeking students in 17-18. Why 17-18? Well, right now we're in June of 2019. Remember, our academic year goes fall, spring, summer. So I won't have the end of my year statistics until probably September, late September, early October. So the last information I have right now is 17-18. What we know is that about 35% of our students got Pell Grants. Pell Grants, just as background, Pell Grant is the program that is available to the highest need, lowest income students in the country. Pell usually is reserved for students who are in the lowest 20% of income. So if you break American income streams into quintiles, right, 20% blocks, Pell Grant is mostly available to that lowest 20%. So what we're saying is that at Valencia, we nearly have double what would be the lowest 20%. Right? As an outreach, our population with the lowest income is about double the national average. The good news, and I shared this earlier, is that only about 13% of our students borrowed a student loan in 17-18. So our loan borrowing is low, our Pell Grant is high. What do we know about Pell Grant recipients? Here's what we know. 2/3 of Pell Grant recipients have an adjusted gross income at 150% of the poverty line. right? So you can imagine that basically what we're saying is about a third of our students are within 150% of the poverty line. That's who our population is. And it compares to 32% of students nationwide who receive the Pell Grant. So even as an average nationwide, we have more students getting Pell than most institutions do. Many of the high-class institutions, like the ones, MIT, Harvard, et cetera, they're lucky if they get to 12% Pell Grant, right? So we have a very large Pell Grant percentage. What else do we know? So I shared earlier today that we conducted a survey in last fall using a company called Trellis. And we surveyed all of our students and asked them about their experience with their financial literacy and their financial wellness. We got some really interesting responses. I'm going to share some of the troubling ones first. We'll come back and do some positive ones a little later, but I'm going to share some troubling ones first. First of all, more than half of our students had food insecurity within the past 30 days at the time of the survey. Right, 31% had very low food security, 25% low. 53% had housing insecurity. That doesn't mean they're homeless, but their housing situation is unstable. 53%, more than half of our students. What's the lesson here? The lesson is, how can you be a successful student if you don't know where you're sleeping tonight and where your next meal is coming from? Right? I know as a faculty member, we often don't think that that's our responsibility, and it isn't, and it is, right? Because both in the context of you're not responsible for solving this problem, but you're responsible for student success, and how can students be successful if they don't know where their next meal is coming from or where they're sleeping tonight? So we do have resources as a college to refer people to. We have Pookie's Food Pantry, we have homeless resources, but even so, even with resources, this becomes a difficult challenge. By the way, I should also tell you, I've also been a faculty member. So when I worked at MIT, I was director of financial aid at MIT. I taught a class on personal finance. I've done an SLS class before at other institutions. So I've also been in the classroom. So I know the world that you sit in as well. Okay, again, going back to our students, 10% said they were homeless within the last 12 months. 16% were homeless but temporarily staying with a relative, friend, or couch surfing. This one really makes me angry. 7% of students borrowed from a payday lender in the last 12 months. What do we know about payday lenders? They're the worst way to borrow, right? The interest rates can be 500%. I mean, literally, they can be astronomical. They're short-term loans with extremely high repayment requirements. And 36% of our students used credit cards to pay for college. That's over a third. Now, that might not be a problem, but it might be. What do we know about most people who use credit cards? Do they pay off their credit every month? No. Right. So that's the issue. A student who's using it just to get the benefit of points, fine. But that's probably not what's going on. Okay. Here's the point where what I would like to do is give you some examples. So what I've done is I've written 4 case studies. And what I'm going to ask you to do is work in pairs or a group of 3. So the 3 of you work together and the 2 of you work together, if that's all right. And I've got 4 case studies. What I'd like you to do is look at 2 of them, review them, and come up with some answers. So the case studies are written with a statement. The question is, after you read the case study, first question is this a problem, the situation that's described here, or not? If it is a problem, how would you change the situation so it's not a problem? Make sense? Okay. So here's the case studies. So you guys are going to tackle 1 and 2. And you all will do problem 3 and 4, if that's all right. Great. So I'll give you about 10 minutes to take a look at the 2 cases. And then we'll bring it back together. So we're going to swing back together. Are we good to keep on going? Good. So we're going to swing back together and talk a little bit about what you shared. And for the audio, I might actually, is it okay if I pass the microphone? Would that be better? Yeah, okay. So let's talk about case number 1. So I know not all of you looked at case number 1, but case number 1 is a situation where you've got a class in the humanities and the arts, and there's a local theater showing Phantom of the Opera. And as a faculty member, you decide to give extra credit to students who go to see the show and write a paper. So what was your response to number one? Who would like the microphone?
I think basically to communicate with the theater, communicate with your dean. Maybe there's resources within the department. But I think we would agree that first option is just go to where the showing is and see what kind of options they could offer you or provide for you. You might even find they would be thrilled to have your X number of students come into their midst at no cost, low cost. Maybe they could volunteer to do some kind of volunteer work that would give them access to the performance and able to make a contribution in the setting.
Great. So let me ask the question. Did you think that the structure was problematic as the question was expressed?
I think the extra credit, the instructor should not provide extra credit for all the students that might not be able to have access to that. So extra credit should be provided so that they can easily access that, and I don't think it would be fair for the extra credit.
So it's a great point, right? When I worked at MIT as director of financial aid, the MIT students used to say, there are three things you can do as an MIT student, and you have to choose two. They are study, party, or sleep. And you have to choose two. And what do you think most of the students sacrificed? Sleep. Sleep. Right. I would say at Valencia, it's a very similar story, except it's not party. It's study, work, or sleep. Right. And what do most students sacrifice? Sleep. So what we know about our students is that a lot of them are working outside of the classroom. Right. I was a mentor in the Brother to Brothers program on West. One of my mentees was working a full-time job and taking 14 credits. And every night he was sleeping 3 to 4 hours. And I can't imagine, right? So as a faculty member, by saying extra credit and go outside of class time, is that really providing, to your point, is that really providing a fair opportunity for students? Yeah, it's a great point. So let's move to case number 2. So case number 2, I don't know that you guys had a chance to talk about it, but you did, okay. Yeah, so by the way, I love musical theater. I'm a musical theater actor, and I love Disney World. So if you ever get an email from me, you'll see the unofficial Walt Disney World font on the email. That's me. I love Disney. So these both are near and dear to my heart. But number 2, you're teaching a class on organizational behavior, and you decide that you want to use as your example Walt Disney World because you presume that everyone has been to Walt Disney World. And you go through a experience about acculturation and hiring and training. And after the class is over, a student walks up to you and says, I've never been to Disney World. I have no idea what you're talking about. What's your response? So do you want to offer any thoughts?
Well, with that, I would just, as I said before, as I was telling them that in order for everybody to have a fair ground, a fair play field, everyone has to attend Disney. So for me is that I used to, I belong to an organization where we have these kids who we take like every 2 years, we take these kids and their parents, 3 bus loads that the community pays for, and we take these children and their parents to Tampa, just to Tampa. And some of these parents and kids have never left Orlando. All right? So with Disney, guess what? There will always be some who cannot go there. So you have to make sure that the playing field is level. And you have to make sure that they all could attend and all can participate, because then you do not have an inclusive environment. You know, you do not have an equity environment in the classroom. So we have to make it in such a way that every student has the ability to really function, to do the assignment. And this is not functionable. If one person is saying that they haven't been, it's not functionable.
That's great. I think it's really important, right? The other piece of that is it's okay to use the example, but you can't presume that people have knowledge to your point, right, either get them there or assume no one has knowledge. It's not to say you can't use the example, but you have to carefully control how that's managed. And we're going to talk about multiple examples from multiple perspectives, right? I mean, I'm a white Caucasian male, right? You know, I recognize that often in our classes, as I studied history, what did we read? We read examples from white Caucasian males throughout my history classes. I have a biased perspective of history by virtue of the education I received. So it's on me to expand my education, which I've done by the readings that I choose to read. But it's on us now to create a space that doesn't have that. And that bias extends to class as well, right? What are we reading that, in what class literature, what literature from different classes can we include in our curriculum? So really important. Okay, so case number 3 y'all had. So quick description, case number 3, you have a student who doesn't show up to class the first 3 weeks. You report them as a no-show. Thank you very much, because we're required to for financial aid purposes. But they get an email, and after the email arrives, you get a frantic call from the student that says, wait, my car was broken. I needed car repairs, and I'm waiting for my financial aid refund to get my car fixed. Can you reinstate me, please? So what's your response to that situation?
Well, we agreed that we would meet with the student, either face-to-face or considering their challenges with regard to transportation, maybe a teleconference. I'd asked for more info regarding what steps he took to address his transportation issues. I'd also asked for the student to come up with a plan as to how he intends to address his car issues in the future. And if he is willing to execute that plan, attend the remainder of classes, and make up his outstanding work, then I would reinstate him. And I would, of course, memorialize that in an email so that if he goes back on his word to, to make up the missed classes and homework, then I can say, well, you agreed to this. You know the boundaries that were set, and you did not meet those. So, we both agreed that not giving the student a chance to make that up and doing something as drastic as preventing him from obtaining financial aid, that's a pretty big step.
Okay. Yeah. Did you have a different take? Did you want to say something? If you don't mind passing the mic.
The take that I have on this is that we have to know what the policy of the college is all about. That's the first thing we need to understand, what the policy, because we can't just take it upon ourselves to say, okay, because guess what? From the time we report that student no show and they're off the roster, they're not going to put him back on because he has already missed the first week. Okay, and that is why it is very, very, very important that you send an email to the students, welcome him back to the class. But also in that welcome letter that you're sending to the student, you tell them no-show, you tell them about a no-show in case to prevent something like this. That is, if you have a car problem and you know you're waiting on your financial aid, this is what you have to do.
So I'll offer, right? Different deans have different policies. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there at the college, right? Some deans would allow the student to be reinstated with the faculty member's position or permission. Some would not. And that's the world we live in right now. And I would also say to you, I completely support I support either decision, right? I support the decision that says, hey, you missed the opportunity. We were straight with you up front. You didn't respond. You should have reached out to me from day one. What do we know about our students, by the way? When our students get in trouble, do they ask for help? No, they don't, right? They wait until the situation has gotten worse and then impossible to fix, right? But what else do we know about it? So I have a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old child, so I live the world of these students right now. What else do we know about our students? They don't like to pick up the phone and call anyone. I have to remind them that thing they hold in their pocket is not just a place to play games and do social media. It's actually a phone. Like, that's what it was designed for. It's a phone. It's called an iPhone. It's not an iComputer, right? So, the idea is, could we call them even at week 1 when they're not in class could we pick up the phone? Could we as faculty pick up the phone and say, hey, I noticed you weren't in class. Everything okay? Now, again, that may shock them into responding. Maybe not. But, there are other avenues, because I often find my daughter doesn't even respond to email these days. She just ignores the email too. So, if it's not a text message or an Instagram, it's not getting any attention. So this one's a thorny one, and it's in there on purpose as a thorny one, because I think this is one that we're still wrestling with to try to figure out. And I get the challenges, right? We have short-term loans that can help a student in that situation. If you need up to $300, we can give you up to $300 to help. We have sources for other funds too if you need them. So that was number 3. Number 4, and I recognize I've got about 10 more minutes, so I'm going to speed through number 4. Number 4 was an example of a student, you doing an intro, get to know you activity, and you say, hey, tell me about what you did this winter break. And one of your students says, my family and I went on a ski trip to Europe. And the rest of the students in class start to laugh and joke about the fact that they can afford a trip to Europe. First of all, what was your response to that? Do you want to offer a quick response? Either one of you?
Why, thank you.
Keeping you up.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, my response is I would probably tell a story of my own just to relate to the student and make the student not feel excluded. Also, I would use it, I guess, as a moment to ask the other students if they've traveled other places, or if there's a place that they want to travel. Something similar has happened to me in my classes before. So I think it's part of classroom management as well, because you don't want anyone to feel excluded or feel bad because of their background.
Right.
Yeah.
So I put, if you don't mind passing that back up, sorry. On the way, yes. Thank you.
My colleague wants me to share a story.
Go ahead.
I was in a faculty development program, actually on coming out of the opening icebreaker question was, what is the time in your life when you've come out of the closet? I don't know whether she was administration or staff, but Maria was her name. And she told the story about being awarded a 4-year full-ride scholarship to Rollins College. And needless to say, her Hispanic family was thrilled silly. By the way, I grew up in a very poor family. I'm part of that Pell Grant.
Yeah.
And I tell my students that week 1, and the connection is unbelievable. So Maria's telling this story to a room full of us. And she said, my family, we celebrated all summer, and my family was so proud, and I was so glad they could be proud of me. And she said, then as we got ready, close to that first week of school, I thought, oh, I've got to go live in a dorm room. Will they accept me? And then she tells the story that it went, oh my goodness, so much better than I expected. Then she goes on and says, oh, Parent Day's coming. Oh my goodness. What kind of an experience will my parents have on Parent Day? Went better than expected. And she said, then of course, I always parked my clunker at the back of the parking lot because I wasn't quite ready for them to know what I drove. Well, needless to say, you could have heard a cotton ball drop in the room. When she finished, so Maria was down front and shared her story. In the back of the room was a tall, skinny guy. I could mention his name. Some of you would know him. He stands up. He looks at Maria. He said, Maria, you told my story, only mine is different. And he said, I grew up in a very wealthy home. Actually, they could have sent me anywhere in the world I wanted to go to school. And he said, but I told my parents I wanted to go to Florida State University. They were disappointed, but they honored my choice because I wanted to go to a place that had some diversity I hadn't experienced. And he said, got close to that first week of school, and I was thinking, oh, are they going to accept me? And then it was Parent Day. Yep. So he said, it was a deja vu listening to me. And then he said, you know what? I parked my car in the back of the parking lot because I didn't want them to judge me through the lens of what I drove. now you could hear a half of a cotton ball drop on the floor. And and when you said create a space, oh my goodness. I share that story every semester with my students when we talk about the cost of college assignment, and I make them build into part of budgeting their time, their energy, their readiness to embrace diversity, because that's part of what you have to budget. And I say, if you're not ready for that, it's okay. If it's all you can do to get through 4 years and get that degree, then go to a very homogeneous setting. But consider it now and start thinking about how you can expand.
So thank you. Thank you for the story. That's great. It's absolutely on point. And my point in raising this example is because sometimes when people hear me talk about socioeconomic status and diversity, they assume that that means making a safe space for only one group. And my point is broader, which is we have to create a safe space for everyone. Right? And so thank you, because your example gives that example. Absolutely, 100%. 100%. So to move us on, right, to this point, what is a multicultural classroom? It's one where all races, cultures, religions, and dare I say, socioeconomic statuses are accepted. And that comes, as I talked about, by the books we read, the activities we complete, the lessons we're teaching. So I want to introduce one other piece, and that is the piece of cultural capital. Right? In the classroom, we teach about our educational material. We teach about the mathematics or college success strategies, right? But what is cultural capital? Cultural capital is the way to navigate the system. Are we teaching people the ropes? Are we showing them how to navigate the system? It's a non-financial social asset that helps you move beyond. For example, do we teach people how to appeal when you're put on SAP suspension? No, right? But that's cultural capital. Right? Knowing that an appeal is even possible and what they look for. So how are we examining that? The other piece I'll give you is this intersection of race and class. So Elizabeth Aries did a phenomenal book. It's in the references if you want to read it. She was at Amherst College in Massachusetts. She did a study of 4 groups. She divided students into 4 groups. She had high SES whites, high SES blacks, low SES whites, low SES blacks, and African Americans. And what she found is that, and again, this probably won't surprise you, but it did until I sort of thought about it, that students who had the same socioeconomic status had more in common with each other than they did with people who were from the same race. Their experiences were more similar, that class was actually a primary identifier, race was secondary. Again, that's, I think, really interesting as a piece to study. And this piece is the one I really want to focus on, which is that racial, cultural, SES, religious, sexual orientation, gender identity can be a very potent mix where culture is born. Earlier today, our keynote, Julio's talked about the fact that each individual is truly an individual, right? That's my point. So, I had conversations with a student when I was at Columbia. She was at Barnard. A Jewish student, a low SES Jewish student, who said Jewish spaces don't feel safe for her because there's an assumption of wealth. And I say this as a Jew, right? So she felt uncomfortable in spaces that were Jewish spaces because of the wealth that was sort of present and visible. Interesting. Talked to a student who was black, defined himself as black, gay, male. He said, there is no safe space for me. Oh, and poor, sorry. Black, male, gay, poor. The gay community expects a certain level of income. I don't have it. The black community doesn't accept me because I'm gay. Right? Where is my safe space? Right? So it's that individual combination that's really important to understand. So the last piece I'm going to talk about is this piece called class in the classroom. And I'm not going to belabor this, except I'm just going to, because this is a piece I'm going to give you. This is the one piece that's almost impossible now to find on the web, but it comes from the Derek Bach Center for Teaching Excellence at Harvard, and they published a really short 4-page paper that talks about addressing class in the classroom. And as a faculty member, I would highly recommend you read it because it has strategies for dealing with class in the classroom. So I'm going to give you a copy of the paper. I've highlighted some of the findings here, but I'm going to give you a copy of it. The most important piece is this one, right? Never make assumptions about an individual just because you think you know their class. And obviously, these are stereotypes, but they're stereotypes born out of student experience. These are lessons that students have told us about themselves, but by definition, they're not going to be applicable for everyone from that group. So just be aware, right? But it still is important. So again, there's some lessons, and given the time, I'm not going to go through them. You'll have a copy of it when I give it to you, but I want to highlight one last piece, which is some good news that our students are telling us. So I told you about the bad news earlier. The good news from our Trellis survey is this, right? Nearly 3/4 of our students believe that we work to make tuition affordable for them. That's what they told us in our survey this last fall. Notice the textbooks, they don't believe we work to make textbooks affordable for them. That's at 33%, but they understand that we do work to make tuition affordable for them. More than 1/3 of our students agree or strongly agree that our Valencia faculty understand their financial circumstances. And students are comfortable sharing their financial difficulties with faculty, with financial aid officers, with academic advisors. And nearly 3/4 of our students report that we have the support services here to help them address their financial situation. So the last couple of slides are those references. Again, these are the links to find any of the information I've shared with you today. You'll find each of them there. The two books that I really highly recommend, this Race and Class Matters in an Elite College, and Speaking of Race and Class. And again, the Creating Inclusive Classrooms, a phenomenal piece as well. And as I say, that class in the classroom piece, I have it for you today. So with that, I'm going to thank you for your time and attention. I am 1 minute over, but thank you so much for your time with us today.